Alright then, it's time for Team Battle Pantheon. This is by far one of the most requested games which want for me to upload during this season. But there's always a problem with Basic 2 Pantheon games in that they tend to steer either in one way or the other and never in between. And you'll see what I mean. And it'll become very obvious actually pretty quickly. So, attack damage red, attack damage quints, armor yellow, magic resistance blues, and I believe 6 cooldown blues as well, and 2190 masteries. Now, some people like to take attack speed because they figure, it'll give them more passive stacks faster and they'll be able to block more damage, but that is entirely unnecessary and it detracts from your power of your, abilities and auto attacks. So, you'll see how I do this. We start off at Grump, and of course I only have one ability, and that's Spear Shot, so that's all I get to do. But watch once I get my second ability of when I use my W. It becomes obvious in blue and then in red. I make sure I use my auto-attacking Q passive one first, and then as soon as I'm about to get struck by the monster, I use my Aegis on them, the W, so I can get another one of my passives. That way, the monster actually had to wind up for the auto attack, and potentially I interrupt it perhaps twice during that whole clearing process, clearing of the camp, and it's sort of like, I want to believe like it canceled one full auto attack on me, so I take one full auto attack less damage from the monster. As you can see, I ended up saving a potion, and I'm at full health doing that. So yeah, if you do it properly, you pretty much won't take any damage from the monsters. However, there is one problem with Pantheon that still plagues him. It's his mana sustain. Thankfully, I have blue right now, but you'll see me actually buy mana potions. Anyways, you saw me gank Aurelia. She burned her flash, so I made a loop around and come back. It's playing to Pantheon's greatest strength of just being an early game menace. The ganking power that Pantheon has is in fact insanely unfair. I gank Aurelia, I fight it out with Kha'Zix, and I actually I overestimate my damage. I flash forward and Q, and I thought that'd be enough, and I'm like, fuck, I should have W'd and killed him. I would have had an Aegis to protect me against the turret. But yeah, my mistake cost my Mundo teammate's life. Nonetheless, Pantheon is an interesting jungler in the fact that he should have never actually been a jungler. Junglers should never be allowed to have a targeted stun. And I know targeted abilities that can pin down a target exist, such as Snare and Maokai Snare, or stuns like Udyr's Bear Slap. But a lot of those have weaknesses, or were granted weaknesses recently. Because I mean, look at this. With Pantheon stun, it doesn't even take much effort. There was no way I could fail this stun. I just walked up, pressed W, Diana was at my mercy, and Lysandra came in to finish her off. It's not really fair, but thankfully there's weaknesses to it too, or not to it, but the rest of Pantheon, I'll explain that right now. The other champions who have those types of snares or stuns, each of them have some sort of weakness. Udyr's weakness is that it's melee, and that Udyr doesn't have any instantaneous gap closers, so he actually has to walk up to you, and you have a lot of response time or a lot of way to figure out how you're going to counter it, that kind of stuff. Maokai's is not a hard stun. It's a snare. I mean, it follows up with a Q, but that means you have to rely on 2 abilities off cooldown and timing in order to make the most of it. At the same time, they recently did buff Maokai, and as a result, they had to nerf the range on his W, so his ganking capabilities went down considerably. But he has more damage, so I guess it makes up for that. Still, though, Pantheon has a targeted stun, and that's insanely powerful, and honestly one of the most powerful ganking tools in the game. But the Pantheon has a lot of other weaknesses that sort of make it fair, so to speak. He has a slow clearing speed that has been established. He's got mana sustain problems. It gets rectified with blue, of course, but that means you're denying blue from your teammates, or you're overly reliant on blue early game. He is also very snowball dependent, in which if you get destroyed early game, then you might not be as effective mid or late game. Like he really needs that sort of feast or famine type of gameplay. And he needs to sort of build damage, or else his damage might taper off when it becomes valuable. Of course, if he's very ahead, he can build tanky and still deal damage, but on even grounds, he won't compare unless he's building damage. Even to his credit, though, he's very easy to play. So if you wanted to play a heavy ganking melee champion with some caster-like qualities, then you could just pick him up and play, and there's no real way you'll fuck that up. I mean, you might fuck up the patterns of, to give yourself a boost to sustain or a little bit more damage, but it still doesn't matter. I fully recommend playing Pantheon if you want to dominate. And he's also a jungler that can carry you from bronze to diamond, since he's also still effective in diamond. And hell, there's some challenger Pantheon players too, so either way, as you can see, my damage is ridiculous. Thankfully I've been able to get some early kills, and I'm able just to start melting people at this point, alongside with my teammates. Pantheon's greatest strength, again, is that he does have ganking tools and the damage to back it up. Very few other junglers have that. It's necessary for Pantheon, of course, because, again, he's very feast or famine, and if he couldn't do things by himself, as in control somebody and kill them, then he wouldn't be too useful. So, like, here, look, like, just the second I get there, boom, she's stuck, and then she's just annihilated. I deal half her health and damage in, like, 2 seconds flat, so. And you'll see that, too. You'll see that when Mundo takes top lane in a little while. He pushes to top lane, I'm going to join him, and you'll see what happens. It's just really disgusting. It's like I said, snowballing, and that's the problem about uploading Pantheon videos, is that they're usually either really boring because the early game was bad and we didn't get anywhere, and so it just dragged on forever, or they're just really short because we just destroyed everybody. Look, I jump on Irelia after we take the tower. I jump on her, and the amount of damage I do in short order is insane. I missed my E because she sort of just went through it, but she was still killed. And then watch this. Kha'Zix is going to jump out from the shadows, and he's just going to get eviscerated. Like, not even close to doing anything. Mundo unfortunately dies, but it's a worthwhile trade-off for a tower and 2 kills. So yeah, Pantheon, the other weakness, is not much of a weakness, but he doesn't make the most use of his Lizard. Of course, it doesn't matter because he's got a stun, but still, that's at least got to note that. And he doesn't ever really get relatively fast unless you get a lot of farm. I mean, not a farm, a lot of gold. So, like, if you taper off in the early game, you're gonna feel all these weaknesses. So, he kind of has the whole same thing as Garen, actually. Is you got to be really brave. Like, look, I know there was a teleport. I know I don't give a fuck. I just go straight at it. I dealt more than half his health and damage, and if he had no escape mechanism available, he would have died then and there. It's just, you got to be almost reckless as Pantheon. It's like you have no escape mechanism. Once you go in, you're all in. And you better be all in. Like, look, I get onto Ezreal. I deal half his health and damage, at the same time also poking down Janna with my stray E. It's just insane. Pick up Pantheon and dominate games. Of course, you could if you like Pantheon, you could also pick champions similar to him in certain aspects. There's no champion that makes it's like 100% similar. I could say Xin Zhao or Jarvan, but they have differences in their gameplay that makes them not exactly the same, right? So, I would say the most comparable champion to him in terms of the dominance you can display early with kind of a haphazard and aloof manner is Maokai. I mean, yeah, they're polar opposites in terms of damage, but and of course, the one is magic and the other one's physical. But Maokai has the same thing. He's a very early game dominant champion. Walk in, press W, then EQ, and they're dead. That's kind of the same thing as Pantheon. It's sort of what you're aiming to do. So if you want a tanky utility counterpart and play similar to Pantheon in the early game, then go ahead and pick Maokai. I stand by that statement too. Some of you might be going crazy. Maokai, but come on. The other, like I said, comparable champions are Jarvan and Xin Zhao. But they're not exactly, they don't have that hard stun like Pantheon. I mean, yeah, Jarvan has a knockup, but it's not as definitive as Pantheon's. Smack and kill. It's a little, planet, dive him, and then do a cool combo as Pantheon. But they're equally as manly, of course, that's true. And weaknesses to Pantheon. Fun fact is that there's not a lot of junglers that are actually more powerful than Pantheon. I mean, they can it kind of goes back into the same thing as ganking, farming, control junglers, right? If you want to beat a Pantheon, you have to be more control versus him. In that, just ward against him, keep track of him, make sure he doesn't get any proper ganks against your teammates, and he's pretty much done for. Like, most champions will lose to him in a fight if he has enough mana to combo you for days. So, you probably shouldn't pick fights with him. If there's junglers who have a better or equal jungle matchup in terms of slugging it out, I would actually say probably the better one is Udyr and Skarner, honestly. The champions who have sustained damage, who don't rely on big punches, because then his passive is just going to make a joke out of you. Udyr especially, man. If I've ever played Pantheon and I fought an Udyr, I was like scared out of my pants. Just I fear Udyr in a lot of matchups just because he's kind of stupidly strong in those kind of regards. And Pantheon will crush a lot of other champions like Jarvan, and Xin Zhao's about equal, and Lee Sin pretty much gets melted by the Spartan. So yeah, this game, not much to commentate because it was pretty stompy, but you got to see at least some carnage from the Pantheon, and you got to hear me rant a little about him. Again, if you want an early game dominant champion, someone who can carry you from bronze easily through silver still easily, from gold still easily to platinum a little bit more difficult, and in diamond about better because teammates are more responsive, then pick Pantheon by all means. He's very cheap to buy, very cheap to rune, and very easy to master, and of course he's manly as fuck.